July 2nd, 1971, Paris. Jim Morrison is one of the most famous rock and roll singers in the world.
Quintessential American rock star. That's Jim Morrison.
Jim had them unholy screams from the other side of the universe.
He's also the ultimate sex symbol, the self-styled Lizard King.
At that time, he was the most beautiful man in Hollywood and probably anywhere else on the planet.
Every guy wanted to be him, and every girl wanted to go to bed with him.
But he's a superstar at war with his own dark demons.
He was saying, help me, help me. Nobody knew how to do it.
Jim had a darkness in his writing, a darkness in his life.
And soon, that darkness will finally consume him. This is the last 24 hours in the life of Jim Morrison. Paris, France, July 2nd, 1971. It's 5 a.m. and Jim Morrison is fast asleep. He's been in Paris for the last 4 months, living in a neighborhood known as the Marais. And in just 24 hours, he'll be dead. Morrison has sublet an apartment at 17 Rue Beautreillis. He currently shares it with Pamela Courson, who, for the last 5 years, has been his on-again, off-again girlfriend. Morrison has come here primarily to escape, both from the pressure of being a rock star and from the possibility of doing jail time in the US, where he's been charged with indecent exposure and public profanity. Jim Morrison is also in Paris in search of artistic inspiration.
So when he went to Paris, it was the idea of here is a new place, a place for artists, a place I can work on my poetry. I mean, what better place to write poetry than in Paris? And I can explore new avenues of my thinking and, in his mind, I think, get himself together.
Paris seems to have had a positive effect on Morrison. He looks healthier and happier than he has in years. But appearances are deceptive. Although he's only 27, years of drug and alcohol abuse have taken their toll. It's a far cry from 4 years earlier, in 1967, when a spry Jim Morrison, accompanied by his band The Doors, roared onto the music scene, determined to conquer the world. Their self-titled debut album was released and became the first of 7 consecutive gold albums recorded by the band. That first album reached #2 on the Billboard charts, putting The Doors in the same league as the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Stylistically, The Doors were different from other bands in the California surf and folk rock scene. With their raunchy blues, they stuck out like a sore thumb, or more like a middle finger. The band's road manager was Vince Traynor.
You had to be there. It was electric, it was emotional, it was riveting, fascinating. The dynamics of a Doors performance simply swept you off your feet.
Someone who got to know Morrison intimately was rock groupie Pamela Des Barres.
Never seen anything like it before. It was sensual, it was rude, it was naughty, and it was just so thrilling, really.
The Doors were along those lines, bands that were clearly talented enough and adventurous enough that they did not necessarily follow someone else's formula.
Some more, jazzy,
One of the reasons that the Doors music holds up and that it's still popular today had to do with the fact that they have a classic sound. They didn't adopt the trends of the day. Their sound has that fresh quality to it. And part of it, I think, is the fact that, Jim had something to say. Jim's lyrics communicated things.
They were so visual beyond the obvious that they took advantage of their knowledge of and their interest in the visual arts so that they really did break on through and present themselves the way very, very few rock stars of that era had even thought to do. And so I think those are significant contributions from Jim Morrison.
There were a lot of bands of that era that were basically feel-good, happy, hippie love movement type things. Jim had a dangerous quality to his work, and that gave his music a relevance that a lot of people didn't have.
But the Doors' music wasn't half as important as Morrison's killer good looks. This was something that didn't go unnoticed by the VP of their record company, Steve Harris.
I took a good look at him and thought, if this kid could read the phone book on key, we're all going to be very, very wealthy.
More dangerous than Elvis, prettier than Mick Jagger, it was clear that the band's greatest asset was Jim Morrison.
Jim had this love for movies, and so he would emulate Greta Garbo. He had the look in the eyes of Marlene Dietrich staring you down, shaking his head and his hair like Marilyn Monroe did. He had those masculine traits with the feminine wiles. That's what made Jim unique.
He hypnotized his audiences, screeching like a shaman. He even invented an alter ego, the Lizard King.
He was called the Lizard King for a reason. I mean, he did slither and he did move sort of reptilian-like, and beautiful body, beautiful face.
Jim Morrison became the face of the Doors and the face of sex in rock and roll.
There was a shot that I named The Young Lion. He just looked magnificent in it, and it was used in the Village Voice. The Village Voice said, there is a new sex symbol now, and his name is Jim Morrison.
But although he soaked up the attention, Morrison was unhappy with the focus placed solely on his looks. He saw himself as a writer first and a singer second, desperate to be taken seriously like his poet heroes.
He didn't like the image of the sex symbol. He wanted to be seen as a philosopher, as somebody who could write poetry, who could deliver this poetry to a live audience and have their reaction. That's what Jim wanted.
But what Jim wanted was not what he got. His rock god image eclipsed any chance he had of being taken seriously as a poet. The failure of that dream would eventually chase him to Paris, and in 19 hours, will finally push him over the edge.